This is fantastic.
Welcome.
Welcome. Mass Mocastic. This is a classy venue.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, but we're going to take care of that pretty fast.
We're going to, drop it down a few notches.
It's awesome to be here in North Adams, where I haven't been in a long time. I worked at the Williamstown Theater Festival once.
Represent.
1988. And so it's a great part of the world, though.
Had you been in movies by then, or that was like theater?
No, man.
Oh,
No,
okay. You were just starting.
Just starting out, just a stripling, just a mere lad. And but it's an awesome, beautiful part of the world.
It is.
Yeah, and anyway, thanks for coming here to our podcast, the Chinwag. Where we talk about matters esoteric and bizarre and offbeat, marginal topics. So we picked a topic for this evening. We just we picked a thing out of a hat to see which is generally we just go with something strange, and we thought we would talk about Monsieur Nostradamus.
Yes, that's
the
right.
seer, the famous prophet and seer, and talk about that kind of thing in general. And we'll see where we actually end up, because that's sort of the idea here.
Yeah, we won't stay on topic.
How fast we can get off topic.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll take care of that.
When I was growing up, I used to hear the name Nostradamus all the time, but I really didn't know anything about him. And then we kind of had to bone up for this because he was like, "We got to talk about Nostradamus." And I'm like, "Oh shit, I have to read some stuff."
We picked the topic, and I was like, "I actually don't know anything about this," and I'd never read any. I'd never read any of these things. And basically, what I knew was sort of like, I went back and in studying for this, I'm so full of shit. I actually have some notes here, which is you should all be really happy I have notes. I went back and watched a movie from 1977, I think it was, called The Man Who Could See Tomorrow.
I don't think that's studying. That's not...
It felt like work to me. But it was, I remember seeing this movie in the theater as a child. I must have coerced one of my parents to take me to see. And because I was really into all this stuff then, and I still am. And it was a fantastic movie narrated by Orson Welles.
Oh, the great Orson Welles.
The great Orson Welles, who used to do all these kind of mind-reading tricks. He'd go on talk shows.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, he did. He would go on talk shows. He'd go on like Merv Griffin and be like, I'm going to read. And he would do all of this kind of... Yeah, he would do kind of magic tricks that were sort of mind-reading things or seeing the future and stuff like that.
This was at the end of his career?
Well, he had a long end to his career. Yeah. But I guess so, yeah. And so somehow somebody paid him a lot of money to narrate this thing. And I went back and looked at it, and it's fantastic, and it's fantastically cheesy. And it's him sitting in a study with a globe and smoking a cigar and being very sort of like, did this 14th century seer actually predict the rise of Hitler and all this stuff? And it's fantastic, but that was it for me.
That's all you knew.
That was basically it. And so it was nice to actually engage with it in a real way because it's super interesting.
I think we both now know way more than we ever wanted to about Nostradamus. I'm going to lay out a couple of quick facts, and then we're going to start to deviate immediately. He's born in 1503 in France. He travels all around Europe. He dies in 1566. He settles down in Stallone, Provence.
Okay.
And at first, he's married and has kids, but they die of the plague, as happened at that time.
Happened frequently. A lot. Yep, absolutely.
But he got.
Did he not foresee that? What was the problem?
Right,
Couldn't he? What was going on there? It hadn't kicked in yet.
No, it hadn't
kicked in yet.
And he gets his start with Catherine de Medici, who marries King Henry
II or something like that,
and he writes some bizarre almanac entry that kind of foretells the death of Henry.
He's like he's a physician, quote unquote, right? Which back then meant kind of anything.
Bloodletting,
putting a leech on your back was being a doctor, basically. And so he kind of he learned sort of astronomy and all kind of these general things towards being a physician. Right, and then astrology as a result of that, and he starts writing an almanac, which
every year it would just sort of make these weird predictions. They were vague, and I guess the way Henry dies is I don't know if you know this, he was jousting.
Right.
And he gets what is it called? The jousting pole?
the jousting pole. Sure, the jousting pole.
Yeah, the research is
sure,
so profound.
Sounds good.
And it basically like gets...
The lance.
The lance.
Sorry, took me a while. Yeah, the lance.
Or something. It gets under his helmet and goes through his eye.
Goes through his visor, yeah.
And they were like, Nostradamus said this was going to happen. And so that convinced Catherine, this guy knows what he's doing. But here's the catch. Then her son becomes the king, and she asks Nostradamus, how long will King Charles live for? And he says he'll live to be 90.
Uh-oh.
But he dies at 23.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But people kept sort of believing him.
I don't know why that didn't end his career right there, but he kept going.
He moved around a lot, I
did.
think. Yeah, I think he moved around a lot.
He moved around.
But these almanacs were super popular.
Yeah.
And I think they made him a fair amount of cash. But he's a guy, like there's a lot of kind of legendary stories that kind of gather around him. Like there's the classic sort of story of him that he goes to some lord's manor and the guy tries to trick him. He tells the cook to get a black pig and a white pig. You ever heard this story?
I haven't heard this, no.
I don't think this is just Nostradamus, this story. So he gets a black pig and he says to Nostradamus, so which pig are we going to eat tonight? And Nostradamus says, the black pig. And so the guy goes back to the cook and says, cook the white pig, to trick him. And then the white pig, the guy's carving the white pig up and it falls off the table and the dog eats it. So they do end up eating the black pig. So Nostradamus is right. He was right. But it's all this kind of legendary stuff around him. And I think a lot of what seems to be known about him seems legendary.
Yeah. He had a kind of cure maybe that he was proffering for the plague. Do you remember this?
Supposedly he could cure the plague with a rosewater mouthwash.
A rosewater mouthwash.
Mouthwash, yeah.
Which is better than the other plague cures, which involved goat urine.
The goat urine mouthwash?
Yes.
I don't know.
So you can see why he caught on.
Yeah, but supposedly they thought he could cure the plague. They thought he could do all of these sorts of things, but it all seems pretty legendary.
It's super legendary, but it's weird because even when, you guys remember when 9/11 happened, when bad things happen, he gets popular all over again. During right up in the lead up to World War II, something everybody was so worried about Hitler coming into Europe that it was something like 3,000 copies of Nostradamus's book called The Prophecies sold in 1 month in a bookstore in Paris. It just completely goes through.
So in times of sort of crisis, he gets popular again.
Yeah.
My question is, when has there not been a fucking time of crisis? Basically. So that's the interesting thing with him is it's I think he's been popular because it's always been fucking
It's always
crazy.
a crisis. It's always,
there's always a sense of crisis. But when does he start actually doing these prophecy things?
I think it's in the in the 1540s.
Really, you don't know really, Steve? You don't know the exact date?
It was a while ago, man. It's a long time ago. It's shrouded in mystery.
He decides I'm going to start doing these real heavy prophecy things, not just next year's harvest is going to be okay, or something like that, or things like that. It's now things that are there's going to be massive disaster and war and these incredibly crazy things.
And the way he does it is he looks out. You guys all know about your horoscope, right? And so what happens is you look out at the constellation and you see where is the moon or the sun or a planet up against the constellation, and then you make certain predictions. And he thought that if you find a conjunction, if it's the moon and and Mars against a certain constellation, the conjunction indicates the repetition of history. So you're going to see the same thing. If there was a holy war 500 years ago,
right,
and now you have the conjunction again, there's going to be a holy war this year.
Chances are there'll be another war.
That was the logic,
in 500 years. So he's actually thinking in real amounts of time and stuff like that?
He said 20 years is a minor conjunction, so that could be bad crops or something. Then 250 years is something worse, and then almost 1,000 years is the other cycle.
Now, in my deep research that I did, Allegedly, I can't tell whether at the time, but definitely now, apparently he was kind of a shitty astrologer. That he wasn't very good at it, apparently. And I don't know whether I think at the time, other rival prophets,
rivals.
all those rival prophets were like, wait a second, your astrology is faulty, my friend.
Your conjunctions are wrong.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of other guys doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And I read something too that they would kind of crib from each other. They would kind of pull shit from each other, and they would sort of like, I guess plagiarism wasn't really the same thing then.
It's totally fair game.
Yeah.
And this was considered science too. Like now we think astrology is this wackadoodle stuff, but then it was science. You only studied the stars so you could do the horoscopes. That was considered.
But was he doing shit like, it seems to me like he was doing what they call scrying, which is,
Scrying.
Yeah, nice, right?
Oh man.
Which is, you're looking at a crystal gazing or a crystal ball or a mirror and stuff like that. I think maybe he was doing that.
Oh.
You see things in the mirror, you see things in the crystal ball. It's these things that have a vaguely reflective surface of some kind, and they'll start to reflect these events and stuff like that. Or I think he did pyromancy.
Pyromancy.
Which is reading fire, which is looking into a flame and seeing things like that.
So that was how he did the divination.
I think it's although I did read in one thing that I found, I did read that apparently what he was maybe doing was eating a lot of nutmeg.
Oh.
Now, do you know this whole thing about nutmeg?
I know that it can make you, it's kind of trippy. It can make you trip, basically.
Sure.
Right?
Apparently sailors used to do it a lot through history, and like whaling ships, and these guys would just break out the fucking nutmeg and like take a big spoonful of it and then drink a lot of water. And I think, I've actually had experience with this.
With
Steve.
nutmeg?
I have. And when I read that Nostradamus had been chugging the nutmeg, I was like, when I was about 15, I had a friend, good friend of mine, still a friend of mine, who's one of those kinds of guys. He was like, hey, I heard if we eat a spoonful of nutmeg,
we can get high.
Yeah, we'll get really high. So we did it. I remember sitting in his kitchen and eating big heaping spoonfuls of nutmeg. And much like ayahuasca, in a way, he puked. I didn't puke. Tripping? Lightheaded, very lightheaded.
You didn't see God?
No, not really. But I do remember doing it. And so I'm like, really? He was doing nutmeg and this was how he was writing all these things? It doesn't make sense to me. By the way, this kid also did the whole banana peel thing. Do you know the whole banana peel thing?
What's
see, this guy's nodding his head. This is a guy, you probably smoked up some banana peel, but hopefully before you came here. But the banana peel thing is you like stick the banana peels in the oven and you cook them, and then you scrape off the shit, the brown stuff, and you smoke it. What's
Donovan? Oh, really?
Is that what that is?
Come
Mellow
on.
Yellow is about smoking banana peels?
Holy
Fantastic
shit.
news. See, this is why we
This is how
gathered
smart
at
our
Mass
fans
Mocha.
are.
This is why we all came to Mass Mocha this evening.
A lot of prophets use some kind of substance to alter the mind so that they can access the other realm, man.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think this is true of all the kind of like
Well, the
prophets
prophets in ancient Greece, the oracles, they would be totally high. They would like burn stuff on the fire and be breathing this in.
really and like mushrooms and stuff like that?
Mushrooms, like we're not sure what it was, but remember we were talking to this specialist on psychedelics, and he was saying soma, which gets referred to in a lot of these cultures as like a shaman substance, may well have been cannabis or magic mushrooms or some kind of other hallucinogenic substance.
Right. So you got to be tripping balls to be a prophet.
Well, I think you do. Yeah, you do, because you have to see to the other side and bring back that wisdom.
It's weird because it kind of vaguely like shamanism too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
is.
it has a weird sort of like, it kind of shades into other things. What's the difference? I was like, what's the difference between like, a psychic and a prophet? I guess psychics will talk to the dead and shit like that. But I guess a clairvoyant is like, you're going to get a traffic ticket on Tuesday. And the prophet is like, the empire's going to fall.
Yeah, they go bigger.
I guess
just go
they
to
think
the big
bigger.
stuff.
Is that what it is? I read an interesting thing a guy once said about prophecy that I thought was kind of great, which was prophecy only works in retrospect. You're only a prophet when people haven't listened to you. And that it's in retrospect that you realize, I should have listened to that guy.
Right.
That's only when prophecy is really powerful, is when it's too late.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because actually the reason why I think prophets are popular is because they sort of help you with two really difficult emotions. One is fear and the other is hope. So we're afraid and we don't know what's going to happen next. And the prophet comes along and goes, there's a secret pattern here. But they don't seem to be telling you particularly hopeful shit. I mean, they're all like, Hitler's going to come along.
Okay. That doesn't seem terribly hopeful, a lot of it.
Although, like, what Nostradamus seems to have predicted, according to some of his fans, is the rise of Hitler. And you might have the actual quatrain.
I think I do.
You.
But yeah,
you may be carrying the quatrain. But
that's right. He wrote in these 4-line little poems.
Yeah, and it seems like it refers to Hitler. But what's funny about it is a few quatrains later, he says there may be a very tall savior, and people interpreted that to mean that's Charles de Gaulle.
Charles de Gaulle is a very tall savior.
Charles de Gaulle is going to solve the problem.
Well, there's a whole thing that supposedly references Hitler. And one of these quatrains is, beasts wild with hunger shall swim the rivers. Most of the host shall move against Ister. He'll have the great one dragged in iron cage when the child the German Rhine surveys. And supposedly this thing about moving against Ister.
Ister is Hitler with one letter off.
Hitler spelled totally wrong. and that apparently...
He nailed it.
But that's the thing you realize, too, is that the translations, people really monkey around with the translations to get them to work right. This was this translation that was done not too long ago by an actual poet who and so it's a kind of serious treatment of it. And this guy's whole take is that actually he's kind of an amazing poet and that he's kind of an artist in a way.
Well,
and that
read another one so we can hear the language.
Read just some more? Oh, I don't know, man.
Because I think people know his name, but they don't know what the stuff actually sounds like.
The Celtic stream shall change its very shores. Agrippina's city go down in defeat. All but the ancient tongue shall be transformed. Saturn, Leo, Mars, Cancer in retreat.
Nice.
How the fuck people get stuff out of this, I do not know. It is kind of amazing. And it's like, how the fuck anybody gets any meaning out of these things, I don't know. The great tower by the river Tamiz shall fall just when the king is locked within. Near the bridge he shall be seen in chemise.
You don't get that?
Huh?
You don't get it?
I get nothing out of this. I'm getting nothing from this.
Sad.
But I will say that in reading this stuff, which I never had, when you just sort of read them en masse like this, they're weird. They're very weird. And it's like, I sit there and go, if he wasn't just tripping on nutmeg, what the fuck was he doing, actually? Like, what is he doing?
He wrote like 1,000 of these.
He wrote 6,000 of these things.
Jesus.
It's like,
Christ.
So you say to yourself, if he's just a fucking quack or a charlatan, he's committed.
He's committed to it, yeah.
You know, and you really got to say to yourself, these guys are committed. So maybe there is something to it because, like, what else? What is he doing?
Well, I think he's sincere. He's like not just ripping people off. I think he believes he's uncovering real truths.
Right, and that's it's funny to me, that thing, because I often wonder about, because there were other guys doing this, but his catches on.
Yeah.
And I think about things like, I mean, I wonder about, like, why does Christianity catch on and not all the other things? You know, I mean, it's like, how come we're not? Why didn't ISIS worship just stay with us?
Yeah.
So we could all be worshiping ISIS now.
Not the military group, but the Egyptian,
Or,
the
you know
Egyptian
what I mean?
god.
It's like, worshiping Neptune or whatever. You know, it's like worshiping Zoroaster, worshiping fire. But for some reason, Christianity, for some reason, takes hold. And I always think about, like, Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like, there's all these religions going on. There's all these people at that time. There's all these other crazy millenarial, apocalyptic religious movements and all this stuff. But for some reason, the guy in upstate New York, the 18-year-old kid in upstate New York, who finds some golden plates in the farm in a field, he won't let anybody else look at them, puts 2 stones in a hat and starts like dictating the book to other people and writes this fucking book, that catches on.
That catches on.
And catches on to such an extent that people are persecuting him
Yeah.
almost right away. You know what I mean? And
That
it's
is
like,
weird.
Why does one thing catch on and not another? Why is this still a guy? When you look at them and you're like, this makes no fucking sense, any of it. It's like, I can't figure out what any of this means.
Okay, but I think these things, they don't exist in a vacuum. So I remember when I was living in Cambodia, I met just a girl who was like tending bar, and she's like, her English was really good. I said, "How is your English so good?" And she said, "Well, I'm a Mormon, and we go to the Mormon church." And for her, the Mormon church was also this way to like learn English and also come to America and to study and to advance her possibilities in the world. And you look at the major things that take off, they oftentimes give you power and opportunity. I don't know how Nostradamus did it.
Well, I guess it gives you power by suggesting you have the ability to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's it.
But it doesn't make any fucking sense, man. I can't read it. So it's really weird. But I guess Mormonism, too, has some... are there any Mormons here? Am I going to...
There's a question and answer
now we can talk
period,
about
so
them.
you can unload on us.
We can talk
then.
about the Mormons. But people have said that Mormonism has a kind of... that it sort of taps into something about the American kind of, free market kind of,
the
get a
frontier.
big family and everybody will like work hard. I suppose that's somehow why it took hold in America, but it takes hold everywhere. And that's the other, and I'm like, the fucking Joseph Smith, fucking Joseph Smith, he wrote a whole book though. I mean, the thing is, it's like, there's got to be something.
The energy
to it.
level, the motivation surprises you.
I mean, you were saying before, maybe it's just the sheer amount of it.
The sheer amount, the
fact
quantity.
that there is a book.
Yeah.
Which the other guys didn't do. The fact that somebody actually sits down and go, I have a text, so you can't fuck with me.
Yeah.
This is like this is it. I got it all here.
But also this book gets translated. Like here's an interesting story. When they think Hitler might be coming, the French do a new translation. And they alter the quatrains to make it look like the French will win whatever's coming. The Germans do the same thing in German.
And the Americans do
And the Americans do the same thing, and they even make little movies. Like MGM makes little movies about Nostradamus.
Everybody was using him, which is so weird.
It is weird.
And the Germans were dropping pamphlets with his quatrains on the French.
Goebbels, who was the Nazi sort of propaganda minister, he said... oh, the British and the Americans will fall for this Nostradamus bullshit, so let's use it against them and drop these pamphlets that make it look like the Reich will win or something.
Which just leads you to go, it can be bent into any shape you want to bend it into.
Because it's vague.
What's that?
It's vague.
Yeah, it's super weird to me. It's super, super weird to me. And looking at this stuff, too, it's like... there are still... we have all these psychics and stuff now. I was amazed to see that actually... The Dalai Lama has a prophet that he consults regularly.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that it's like there's a guy who, for one guy in each generation or in each Lama will choose a guy who then
his personal
astrologer who can channel a spirit that will then act as an oracle for him.
I didn't know that.
That's crazy. that it's still really present in the world is amazing.
Well, Hitler thought, sorry to keep going back to Hitler.
Well,
and
it
the
does.
Nazis.
And unfortunately, this shit always comes back to those guys. All of this crazy stuff comes back to those guys, unfortunately.
And he had a copy of Nostradamus in the bunker when they found him. He had like 80 books, and that was one of them.
He had 80 books, and that was one of them.
I'd like to know what else was in the library.
Yeah. No, it's super weird to me. It's like, and that idea of like, are they intentionally being sort of charlatans or not is a thing I can never figure out.
I don't think so. I think most of these people that have lasted a really long time, they're not charlatans. They were sincere. I think he's sincere.
But that whole thing is that a good con artist and a good charlatan has to actually believe his own bullshit.
Oh.
At some point. Or that the line...
look at politicians, Yeah,
well, look at politicians or like, Bernie Madoff or something like that, who at some point must actually believe his own shit, or he must like it's a part of this that's always fascinating to me.
Well, you're the actor.
Oh, yes, I am. Yes, I am.
And I'm just thinking, like, is there some time when you're playing a role and you're like, it inhabits you or you inhabit it, like you become the thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. And it's and the
Like you've played some assholes.
Okay, is this where we're going to go now? Really? Is this? Oh, I see. Sorry, Ebert. Is this where we're going to start? Like, thumbs up, thumbs down. We're going to have a little critique of my career. Yeah. Is that what's going on? I've played some assholes. Yes. Are you suggesting that means I am an asshole?
I don't know where I was going with that. I just wanted to bring it up.
No, but it's true. Well, but that's a whole weird. I mean, you get into a weird realm of how much is it with acting? How much is it the person?
Yeah.
How much am I being myself?
Yeah.
And how much is it like being somebody else? And inevitably, it's coming out of you in some way. So you can't really say it's not you, because it's coming out of my experience and my imagination and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm manifesting all of that stuff. So it's got to be me in some way, But with these guys, I don't know. It's like sincerity and stuff like that. I don't know.
But they're doing a lot of performing, right? I mean, you got to imagine these must have been like in public, some of these things.
You think so?
I think so. Like,
I suppose so. Yeah. I suppose all those like prophets, maybe the biblical, were they like walking around doing this? They were real guys. Were they real guys?
And shaman. Yeah.
But was like Ezekiel a real guy? Do we know? Do we have any idea?
Well, I don't know about
Ezekiel. Or any of those
Ezekiel.
prophets, Daniel and Ezekiel.
Yeah, I think
and stuff?
like some of them, like Daniel is like a prophet. One of those books it's written in the 2nd century BCE, but it's supposed to look like it's happening in the 6th century BCE, which is a clever move for prophecy.
Oh, weird.
Right?
Weird. Oh, so he's already setting it in the future?
Yeah, no, he's setting it in the past and
I
making
see.
it look like all
it goes
that shit.
backwards.
Yeah,
Sorry,
all
it took
that
me a
shit
second.
happened,
Right.
basically. And I believe there is a real Daniel, but then it all gets like completely, distorted through the storytelling. And there is a John from the book of Revelation.
There is a guy.
John
there
of
was
Patmos.
a guy.
Yeah.
And he was clearly eating a lot of nutmeg wherever he was.
He was way into the nutmeg.
He was super
John,
into he got way into the nutmeg because that stuff is crazy. And talk about something that has lasted.
Yeah.
And almost more than anything,
the book of Revelation.
that has kept. I was looking at that again, which I hadn't looked at in a long time.
It's awesome.
And I was like, I just thought there were 1 or 2 batshit things in this.
No, there's a lot.
But it's just endlessly batshit.
Batshit or just clever and imaginative and fantastic.
Well, yeah, clever and imaginative. But that's also the thing. It's like, it's talking in weird sort of signs and symbols and images, and all that stuff is more powerful than, I mean,
than
it's
literal
like that.
language.
And I'll always, those images and a dragon, it's like things like this will always, and there's planets, Mars, and all these like things. I think that's part of the power too, which is why I buy the idea that he's a poet in some ways, and in some ways when I look at it, I'm like, everything else aside, about even whether it's about anything specific, it kind of is scary when you read it.
Yeah, it's a little
There's
scary.
There's something really scary about it.
End of the world stuff.
Yeah, I remember when I lived in Seattle a long time ago, it was approaching the millennium. And it was in the 90s. And I bought this book, kind of cheesy, crappy, like, like a drugstore. I'm fucking wandering around, probably high on nutmeg. And I'm like, and I found some crappy, like paperback, like predictions thing. It was all these. And I just remember thinking, it scared the shit out of me.
Did it?
Yeah. And it wasn't even so much, it was just the idea, the apocalyptic level of it. No matter what it was or who it was that was saying it. This sense of disaster.
Did you see those comics?
He's looking in the future, and it's just a fucking disaster.
It's a total disaster, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's hope. This is what I'm saying. It's fear and hope, because you're going to have a terrible judgment. There's the good and the bad, and all of it's going to be judged, and then there's going to be a battle, the Armageddon, and then there's going to be a great unifying of all that stuff. It's all going to be fixed in a new paradise.
Like
So that's
somebody's
the
always
hopeful
going to
part
come
of
in
it.
and fix it.
That's what Carl Jung, the psychologist, thought there was a kind of archetype of apocalypses, and he thought that was the key. Wherever you see them, it's like opposites in tension with each other, fighting, then some kind of final judgment and battle, and then the unity of the opposites.
So it's always going to somehow unify and then break apart and unify and break apart and unify.
Yeah. And you see that in Christianity. You see it in Hinduism. It's in Nostradamus.
In their sort of apocalyptic, at the end, there will be something after it that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Everything
great.
goes to shit and then it will be okay.
So be afraid, but not too afraid. People use different stuff to predict the future, like divination techniques. Like, what were some of the things that you said?
I found it interesting. This was interesting. I found a list on something called Wikipedia that I was fascinated to discover. Yeah, I was fascinated to discover this. It's a handy thing. I was actually amazed to see how many different kinds of methods of divination there were. And there's all kinds of things on here, using all different kinds of things. There was something, I was struck by something called occultomancy, which is divination by needles, which struck a thing with me because I had a great aunt an Italian great aunt who apparently read fortunes with a needle in a bowl of water.
Really?
Or pouring the olive oil in the water and the patterns of the oil in the water.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool?
How would that translate into the future? Like, how do you
How the fuck would I know, Steve? I don't know. I'm Italian, but I'm not that Italian. I mean, there's limits to my Italianness. No, I don't know. I mean, but it's all that stuff. Tea leaves? Like, I've never understood that. How the fuck are you supposed to be reading tea leaves? None of that makes any sense to me. There's this thing called apantomancy, chance encounters with animals.
Pantomancy?
Apantomancy.
Oh,
which I don't know what the hell that means. I'm like, I have every now and then a chance encounter with my cat, and I can tell that the future's not good because I don't think my cat likes me. But there were all kinds of interesting things. There was something called Arsgang, which is a Swedish form. Somebody heard of this? Did somebody just say?
Somebody like, yeah, Arsgang.
Really? Is there a Swede out there who knows what Arsgang is? Arsgang is some kind of like, before the first light of Christmas Eve, whatever that means, you without looking at a fire, with no food or drink, you walk into the forest further than you can hear a rooster crow, which is far, and you look at you study the fields and the roads, and you will see the future and learn about the harvests and the funerals, and you will have supernatural encounters. That's Sweden, Steve. That is Sweden. Who knew it was that action-packed in Sweden? But there's all kinds of crazy things. There's catoptromancy, which is a mirror, looking into a mirror, which I thought was interesting. There's something called cephalomancy,
the brain?
Boiling a donkey's head.
Oh, shit.
But was also turned out to be heating the skull of a donkey to find out who a murderer was. And as you're naming people's names, the potential murderer, if the skull cracks or the jaw pops open, you're fucked. Don't do the crime if you cannot do the time.
It's so
you're
it's
fucked.
Better than the
and
Ouija
something
board.
called osteomancy too, which was any bones.
Oh, bones.
Throw in a fire, and if they cracked or something like that, that would
tell
be
you
an indication of something, which sounds super primitive.
Well, there's also the liver, right? Was a big thing.
You could read the liver. You could read all the like entrails of things and stuff like that. Was a big one. There's something called this one I really liked, Cladonism, and there's a form of this apparently in Iran. Was in Persia and Iran. You would go to a shrine to Hermes in ancient Greece. You would whisper your question into a statue of the god's ear. You would go out then and listen for the god's answer in any chance words you heard of passers-by. Isn't that weird? And apparently in Iran, girls, it's a thing that young women do, where you will go out, you will have a question, and you will listen to strangers around you to catch any chance word that seems
significant.
Yeah, that seems like it will.
But that's the key is, I think these things work, in scare quotes here, because you, the listener,
right,
connect the dots. Like here's an example. Last week in my class, I was teaching a logic class, and I brought in the day's horoscope, and I said, okay, where are the Sagittarius? And a couple of kids raised their hand. I read their horoscope. I said, where are the Pisces? They raise their hand. I read their horoscope. I do this like 5 times. Then I said, how many of you felt like I actually captured something about you in these horoscopes? Was there some essential quality that you identified with? And they were like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then I revealed that I hadn't read their horoscope at all. I'd read somebody else's horoscope.
You.
I know,
You're going to get a bad
asshole,
rating.
Yeah.
This is going to be like,
mean.
Professor Osmond's
Yeah.
an asshole.
Total asshole, yeah. You should see my teaching evaluations. This guy's an asshole.
Liar. Yeah, totally.
But you see what I mean? Like if it's vague enough.
Totally. And that's what, like, things like the I Ching. Has anybody ever used the I Ching? Or do you ever use the I Ching?
I have not.
Oh, really?
No, I have not.
Oh my God, it's amazing. And again, because it always seems to be meaningful in some way. But
What's the situation where you used it and you felt like it?
Anything. I mean, you can kind of, I know people who just sort of consulted at the beginning of the day to see, like, how's my day going to be or whatever. But you can consult about specific things. And there's a whole elaborate way of doing the I Ching with these straws where you sort of like, and it takes forever to get the 6 sort of, whatever the to create a hexagram with all these different configurations. But it always feels incredibly meaningful.
It does.
It does. But again, it's all interpretation and stuff. And
I know
and tarot
somebody
and stuff like that.
Yeah,
feels
tarot's
like,
like this too. Somebody I know rolls a 20-sided dice every morning. And if it's above 10, they're like, it's going to be a good day. And if it's below 10, they're like, it's going to be a bad day.
Wow.
And I think it doesn't really give you, actionable knowledge, but it could help you deal with the day that you have ahead of you. So it's kind of a coping mechanism.
Sure. No, it all is. No, and it's generally comforting. You generally walk away from it going, but I did want to just close out with one form of, my favorite form of divination that I read about is, I'd heard about this, but I didn't know it was a real thing, is rumpology, which is reading people's asses. Rumpology or bottom reading, I have to read this to you, is a pseudoscience, no kidding, akin to phrenology, okay, performed by examining crevices, dimples, warts, moles, and folds of a person's buttocks, in much the same way a palm reader would read the hand. It is a neologism, although it's been around for a while, coined by late American astrologer Jackie Stallone, Sly Stallone's mother. Oh, God. But it is traceable, traceable back to the Babylonians, Indians, ancient Greeks, and Romans. But this is the great thing. Rumpologists have a variety of theories as to the meaning of different posterior characteristics. According to Stallone, the left and right buttocks reveal a person's past and future, respectively. Although she commented that, quote, the crack of your behind corresponds to the division of the 2 hemispheres of the brain. Oh, dear. According to blind German clairvoyant and rumpologist Ulf Buck,
come on,
a, quote, apple-shaped muscular bottom indicates someone who is charismatic, dynamic, very confident, and often creative. That sounds right.
Ulf knows.
That actually sounds right. A person who enjoys life. Yes. I would say a person with an apple-shaped muscular bottom would enjoy life. A pear-shaped bottom suggests someone very steadfast, patient, and down-to-earth. Makes sense. The British rumpologist Sam Amos claims that, quote,
God.
I know, a round bottom indicates a person is open, happy, and optimistic in life. However, a flat bottom suggests the person is rather vain, negative, and sad. And I can attest to that, Steve. I can absolutely attest to that. Rumpology can be performed either by sight, touch, or by using buttock prints. In addition to live readings, Jackie Stallone performed buttock readings using emailed digital photographs, or maybe Xeroxes. People just plopping their ass on a Xerox, and has claimed to predict the outcome of presidential elections. Whose ass was she reading? Mike Dukakis' ass, and Oscar Awards by reading the bottoms of her 2 pet Doberman pinschers. What the fuck? Ulf Buck, who is blind, claims he can read people's futures by feeling their naked buttocks.
I bet he does, yeah.
Yes, he does. Well, that was a ton of fun. We really hope you enjoyed this Chinwag. Thank you for listening. We have bonus content coming your way in a few days, so please keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to like us, follow us, rate us, and review us. All that kind of good stuff. We love to hear from you. And until next time, wag on.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films, hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.